I'm Kathleen Ponanen. I'm the Housing and Education Manager for Seattle Public Schools. I've been in this role for 4 years now. I come from working previously at the Seattle Housing Authority and have a affordable housing urban planning background. So now hold an infinite number of acronyms of both housing and education speak in my head. I'm also a mother of two, and my kindergartner is on her teacher video conference call right now. So hopefully my internet holds up through this whole time. And I'm so pleased to be joined with my counterpart at Seattle Housing Authority, Marcus Gittens. Marcus, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Great. My name is Marcus Gittens, and I'm the education and first year in this role. I do come from an education background, a former middle school teacher, and also have done work in several communities through nonprofit education work. So I'm excited to learn and share with you all today.
Thank you all for being with us from around the country. We had hoped to have this session be very participatory and interactive and have a chance for all of us to learn from one another. There are amazing experts and people doing incredible work in this video conference call right now. And so we're really inviting you to have a dialogue with us. And so we hope this can be more of a discussion around what does systems change mean, how do we integrate it into our work, how do we push ourselves to challenge the systems that we're in. So we hope that you can help us make this a dialogue. However, we also want to be very mindful that people are in various different emotional bandwidths and capacity. So please prioritize your self-care, stretch, refill your drink, do whatever you need to take care of yourself during this time. The topic that we have for you today is focused on systems change, and we will be using a tool that I believe Nicole or Opera helped me put in the chat. It's an article, we've posted 2 pages of it, to think about systems change, and so we hope it's useful to you. I also want to highlight that although issues of race are heightened in our country right now, this is nothing new. This since our country was founded, these systemic issues, and racism is ingrained in all of our workplaces and the institutions that we work for. And so this to me is systems change is such an important topic to be able to really break down and see how things that are at play that are harmful to specifically our students and families of color. So we really hope that we all can learn from one another in this space and bring.
Yes, my name is Marcus Gittens, and I'm the Education and Youth Development Manager for Seattle Housing Authority. I'm not sure if you guys heard me earlier when I introduced myself. Been having a little bit of internet issues here, but definitely excited to learn and share with you all today on this topic. As Kathleen touched on, systems change certainly requires, definitely from the perspectives of our agencies, definitely requires a racial equity lens and an anti-racist approach. So as we're talking about that and talking about the youth and families that we're in partnership with, we definitely want to highlight that lens.
So I'll just try to restate really quickly. This presentation is focused on systems change. We were hoping to have a very interactive dialogue with you all because we know that there are many experts also in the room and doing incredible work. So we really hope that you can make this a dialogue. But please do prioritize your self-care during this time. Stretch, take a break, refill your drink if you need to. And take care of yourselves. One thing, so this topic is around systems change and how do we see and we'll be sharing in our Seattle Families, Seattle Public Schools, and Seattle Housing Authority partnership how we take a systems change approach and what that means to us. But we also want to offer a tool in this article that has been posted in the chat called The Water of Systems Change. And it offers a way of looking at the policies, practices, mindsets, power dynamics. And so we hope that this is useful for you to analyze and figure out how we can collectively reform our systems. I also had mentioned that although this is a time that the issues of race are heightened in our country, this is nothing new, and these have been going on for generations. And we have chosen whether to see them or not see them, or do something about it or not. And so this particularly is extremely important to us. And so we weave these tools and these ideas into our individual institutional and structural racism work, and find it as a useful way to think about how our systems continuously harm people of color. So, sorry for that quick intro while I try to get back on audio. So this is a cool, we wanted to try this cool tool that Abra introduced me to. When you go up to where you mute yourself or stop video, you'll see a little pencil that says annotate. And you can draw, you can use a stamp. We'd like you to mark on this line, how far are you into your partnership? Are you 0 years into it? Are you just starting? Or is your partnership 10 years or more going? So we're about 6 or 7. So I've placed a heart right there. Do folks know how to do that? So we have a few folks just starting the partnership. Almost 10 years or more. So people at all different ranges of doing this work. Oh, this is great that we have so many people at all different levels. Okay. Can you still hear me okay? I'm hoping that this microphone works better.
Yeah,
Nicole,
it sounds
could you
good.
give me a thumbs up? Okay, great, thank you. Wonderful. If you are just starting your partnership, I think this is a great time to think about what systems change means to you, what are the values and intention behind your work, and even if you're further along in your partnership, it's never too late to think about systems change. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide. Marcus, did you have any comments to add before we move on?
No, I think we're good to move on.
Okay, thanks. Thank you all for participating in that. Let's see. Okay, there we go. Oh, all the markings went to the next slide. Let me see how. I'll erase that, Marcus, while you're sharing about this.
Okay, great. And again, apologies for the connection issues. I hope everyone can hear me better now as well. So we wanted to talk a little bit about where we do our work and who we're in partnership with and who we serve. So Seattle Housing Authority students make up about 10% of the Seattle Public Schools population. And there's over 60 languages represented by SHA students. And about 94% of SHA students are people of color. So nearly 1 in 10 SPS students are Seattle Housing Authority students. And Seattle Public Schools has an emphasis on Black excellence and specifically African American males. And Seattle Housing Authority houses 46% of the district's African American males. So just a snapshot overview of our population and the demographics we serve.
Yeah, so we wanted to start with our context that most Seattle students are attending Seattle Public Schools. This also has helped us. That's the fact that 5,500 students are also served by Seattle Housing Authority, and our specific population that we hope to serve better is also housed with SHA. So we talk in our strategic plan about serving our students furthest from educational justice. And our new strategic plan has really emphasized the importance of working with Seattle Housing Authority. So we're going to transition back to the idea of systems change. And here is just an image of what silos look like. We all know what they are and work within them. Could you just give me an emoji or a thumbs up if silos have ever gotten in your way before? Have you ever experienced silos making it harder to serve the students and families that you work with, or see how silos make it more difficult for our families? Okay, so we're going to start by answering the question of why our partnership feels like it's important to address systems change and how we see silos playing out in our ecosystem. So the image on the left is what we believe is the current ecosystem. And we want this graphic on the left to highlight two things. One is that families are navigating transportation, public health, education, housing, and it is not the norm, except for your partnerships out there, for us to be talking to one another. We're all coordinating these efforts separately, and that often creates confusion for our families. There are entire positions that nonprofits have staffed called system navigators, because families need someone to walk them through the bureaucratic processes, the documents and forms that they need to compile to access all the different services that they need, or they're running around the entire city on a bus line trying to access these various different services. And so we believe it's important for us to work together to make it easier for families to get what they need. The second is that we're often doing things to families, as illustrated by the arrows. Rarely do families have an opportunity to share how these services are working for them, to be at decision-making spaces, to be able to identify the problem and the solution. They are the experts with lived experience, and they're the ones that are most impacted. And so rarely do we create opportunities for families to be part of the solution-making process. And on the right is kind of the systems an example or an illustration of the systems that we are really hoping for, that we are constantly centering students and families, and that we have this cohesive network between the Housing Authority, Seattle Public Schools, and other partners to be truly responsive to their needs, and to also improve our own systems so that we are getting better and better at not just serving the current generation of students, but future generations as well. And that we're allowing for two-way feedback, that students and families are part of this process with us as we try to grapple around these complex issues. So the outer ring represents the three core areas that we do our work in family engagement and family leadership, creating a network of community supports, and aligning our systems, finding out what are the ways that families are navigating both housing and education, and how do we make that systems navigation easier. Marcus, would you like to add to that before I move on?
I just have one small point to make. It's a recognition that we still have a lot of work to do in this area and have not arrived in any of our agencies in this area. But this lens that we're presenting today is both a way that we've sought to do our work, and also a way that we can continuously evaluate our progress along the way.
Thank you. So what is systems change? That is a broad word being used quite often, and I really like the definition that the article, The Water for Systems Change, offers, which is systems change is about shifting the systems or the conditions that hold a problem in place. So again, the definition is systems change is shifting the conditions that hold a problem in place. And this definition helps me because I think it causes me to shift away from a deficit ideology of the students and families that we are hoping to serve. I think we can sometimes hear that rhetoric of if only families would make better decisions or make the right decisions, then they wouldn't be in these situations. And instead, it causes us to see the systems across housing, education, transportation that hold the problem in place. All of these are interwoven like this web. So it allows us with this definition to center where the system is at fault and not blame families. I want to take a moment to pause and invite you to say what you think about this definition, either in the chat. What questions do you have about it? Does it make sense? Does it resonate with you or not? But this definition helps me think about, I bring this definition when I am trying to analyze a problem, whether it's about attendance, graduation rates, or third grade reading. What are the root causes behind these? And what are all the other factors that we may not even know of? And what are families saying? When we often talk to families about attendance, they'll often bring up feelings of a sense, whether they feel like they belong at school or not, or the kind of racial and power dynamics that they experience at school, both from the student and family perspective. So those are all things that are connected to attendance, and it's not just one single issue or a silver bullet answer. So we are going to give a very brief overview of the 6 conditions of systems change that are in the article posted, or you can find it on the website. In a very short 1 hour video conference, we don't have time to dive deeply into it, so I apologize for the quickness of this, but I really like how this article uses this table to talk about the different things that make up our systems. Which are, and they have you can't see this with my background, but I'll explain it briefly, but there's a 1-pager with this graphic and short definitions for each of these. So policies are the governmental, institutional, and organizational rules that guide the entity's actions. Practices are the activities or the habits that comprise of the work. Resource flows are how money, people, knowledge, information, and other assets such as infrastructure are allocated and distributed. Relationships and connections are quality of connections and communication that occur among all the actors in the system. And power dynamics is the distribution of decision-making power, authority, and both formal and informal, that influence individuals and the organization. And mental modes are the habits of thought, the deeply held beliefs and assumptions that influence the way we think, what we do, and how we talk. So our partnership has tried to dive into each of these areas of systems change. It's not often seen as sexy work. Sometimes often, maybe many of you have experienced, you'll get a grant to do an entirely new project or pilot and then that grant might go away. And how has that grant, if we didn't use those funds or that important resource to change policies, practices, resource flows, power dynamics, all of these things in this chart, there is no way that that work can continue past a grant ending. So this is helpful to me when we receive a new opportunity or a new resource to think, how is this going to make the school district better? How is this going to make the housing authority and our relationship better for families, not just now, but again, for future generations? Marcus, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, so as we start to get into examples of work that we've done in our partnership along these 6 conditions of systems change, we want you to be thinking about the strengths in your current partnership along these 6 conditions, and then also the areas that you might be curious about diving deeper into. And if there is one thing that you'd like to see changed in your partnership, magically changed by Monday, what would that be? So those are some questions that we'd like you to be thinking about as we go through these examples, and we'll circle back to those in a few minutes.
Yeah. So we have an example for each one, but for the sake of time, we might jump just through a couple of them. And if you have questions later or want to hear an example of one, please do let us know. So the first example we want to give is about power dynamics. And that's something that I mentioned earlier of how are those that are most impacted by the situation and having a stake in coming up with a solution. So this is an image of Somali families who are also our students and also utilize Seattle Housing Authority's resources. We've worked with 15 families over the last 3 years and published 3 books with them. So Somali families designed, authored, and illustrated these children's books. And this came from really talking about attendance. We showed our K through 12 attendance numbers of how SHA students are more chronically absent than their non-SHA peers. And again, we heard lots of different things coming up. But one of them that continuously stuck with me is this idea of are our schools welcoming to certain groups who come from different cultures or speak different languages other than English? How are we making sure that all students can show up as their full selves? And so this was one idea to address that comment. So families develop these books, and then as a result of having them published and working with Seattle Public Library and the Somali Family Safety Task Force, we were able to publish these books, and now these 3 books, this series is in every elementary school library, every kindergarten classroom or Head Start classroom, and then also our city's libraries as well. We've also, and so we've hoped that this effort has illustrated to families that we see you and we honor your culture, and we hope that you show up as your full selves in our school buildings. And this is an attempt to, it doesn't fix it entirely, but it's an attempt to try to dive into that. Another thing that we've been practicing is around this concept of co-design, and that is a term that Dr. Ann Ishimaru from the University of Washington has helped coach us on. So we took a piece of our grant and had 10 dialogue sessions with families who live in the New Holly neighborhood and said, what would you do with this grant to address the educational needs that you identify in your community? And then as a result of that, they kind of came up with this structure for a mentoring program, a boys and girls small group mentoring program that many of them have put their own children in. And now for for the second year is up and running, and families are participating. And so this is something that I personally want to challenge myself on, is how do we get better at seeing families as leaders and utilizing the assets and the lived experience they have to help us solve these complex problems. I'm going to move on to the next example. This one is about resource flows. We definitely have a housing crisis in Seattle, but we are also fortunate to have new affordable housing developments coming online in the city, and not every neighborhood is equal. And so sometimes new affordable housing will come on in certain pockets of the neighborhood that also don't have the youth infrastructure ready for them. And so a building in the north end near the University of Washington opened up, and there are over 50 children under 5, but there is no Head Start service, Head Start or preschool serving that area. So I was able to take this back to our Seattle Public Schools Head Start, and they created slots in a Head Start school that is actually outside, zoned outside of this area, and created a bus stop right in front of this building. And then the next year, as they were looking to further investments in Head Start, they now know how to use, how to look up where our affordable housing mixed income, family-sized 2 and 3 and 4 bedrooms coming online, and how do we match that with the same funding that we have for preschool. So we Mercy Housing Northwest has opened up a brand new building in our Mount Baker neighborhood, and simultaneously we will have a new Head Start preschool program in that elementary school. So if we never are in a room together asking about how housing and education affect our students and families, how do we make these connections and work together, families will be moving in without the necessary supports that they need. And then I'll turn it over to Marcus to talk about mental modes.
Great. So Seattle Public Schools launched a trauma-informed professional development training focused on brain development and adverse childhood experiences. So Dr. David Lewis has been leading this work on behalf of Seattle Public Schools. And so Seattle Housing Authority was also able to receive that same training through our partnership. And about 100 staff attended 5 trainings with Dr. Lewis. And then also, in addition to that, we also had a full staff training as well. So being exposed to similar trainings at Seattle Public Schools around trauma-informed practice has helped our agency think about how our practices impact youth and families. And it's also helped us to think about how our inspection process impacts youth and families, knowing that that can be a stressful time for parents and also youth, and can also lead to increased absenteeism and things of that nature. So it has led to increased conversations around our policies and practices at Seattle Housing Authority through that training, and we're hoping to continue more of that in the future. We can go to the next slide, Kathleen. So this is a picture of Bailey Gatzert Elementary on the first day of school, and we have Seattle Public Schools staff and Seattle Housing Authority staff, along with community members, greeting and welcoming students with high fives on their first day of school. And it's at this school that we started our pilot project, Home from School, in an effort to provide stable housing and allow students to stay in the same school. So we recognize that unstable housing, of course, has a direct impact on students' access to education. It can drastically increase absenteeism and pose a challenge for families, students, and schools. And so the Home from School pilot project was able to provide an increased value for vouchers. which allowed 36 families to have stable housing and stay within the catchment area of Bailey Gatzert School. So providing stable housing, of course, is incredibly important. And although the pilot is still being evaluated, it's tremendous that many families have been able to stay in their school and not have to change schools. And I will turn it back over to Kathleen to talk about Seattle Public Schools policies and practices.
Okay. Yeah, there's two policies that that I also want to mention. One is that Bailey Gatzert is in the Seattle Housing Authority neighborhood of Yesler Terrace, and one policy that was implemented that was extremely helpful to supporting our students' education was 1.5 years of advance notice prior to a family needing to relocate due to that redevelopment. And so that provided our school families 2 summer options to move rather than moving midway through the school year. And so that was extremely helpful to think about how could this impact, how could relocation impact the experience of students and families. And then at Seattle Public Schools, we ask that families attend their neighborhood school, and we were able to make exceptions so that families could continue to live at Bailey Gatzert, although they're to keep attending Bailey Gatzert, even if they don't live in the neighborhood. And then the second is watching our City of Seattle's community preference policies, which is when affordable housing comes online in our high displacement neighborhoods, how can we target historically marginalized populations, and previously families accessing a service such as attending school in that area was not considered under that community preference policy. So we were able to integrate that. And then one of the last examples we want to give is around our practices and reinforcing the connection between school and home. This is extremely important right now, especially as in this time of distance learning during COVID-19, school and education is happening at home. So how crucial it is, even in normal times and in these times of pandemic, to have a cohesive school-home connection. This is our current superintendent, Denise Juneau, on her very first day, her first school year on the job, at Lake City Court, one of SHA's communities, and riding the school bus with students to John Rogers Elementary. And so we have new practices being established. We have principals not just asking families to come to their school building, but going out into SHA's communities and having dialogues with families, creating parent leader positions in their school, conducting home visits, all things that are strengthening the relationship between teachers, principals, and their families, so they have direct access to people who can better support their education. We also want to mention the kinds of things that we were able to do because we have this strong partnership, which is sending out 1,500 art kits through over a dozen different affordable housing partners during this school closure. Every week we have a dozen or so different housing partners, nonprofit housing partners too, picking up our printed learning packets and distributing them on a weekly basis. Right as the crisis hit, we were able to work with Northwest Harvest for food distribution. SHA has initiated their own mechanisms for getting food to families, but all of this was due to having these strong partnerships. And so we're gonna take a pause and go back to this idea of systems change. We've given you a couple of examples around policies, practices, resource flows, and mental modes. And so want to take a pause and see what questions do you all have or thoughts before we launch into asking you several questions. You can ask those questions in the chat. You can raise your hand. You're welcome to unmute yourself.
So it looks like, this is Nicole. It looks like we have a question from Ed Lowndes. It says, congrats on all the great work. Education is often thought of as a local issue, but in keeping with changing systems, is quality affordable housing on the agenda of any national education organizations? If not, how do we get it on their agenda?
That's a great question. I welcome anyone on the call to be able to answer that. We've met with our Senator Patty Murray several times to keep her updated on the different issues that we're seeing. Also at the local level, I've been matching our demographer and our enrollment office in the school district with the Office of Housing, because some of the trends that I'm seeing of the types of housing being built in our city is often favoring 80% area median income housing rather than where our families are at, which is really that 30 to 60% of the area median income, which in King County is extremely high, around $100,000 a year. And so we really need this lower income bracket. So I'm hoping that our trends in school enrollment data can help push these policies on a local level. And then also, we hardly have 2, 3, and 4 bedrooms being built. So our large scale families cannot afford to live in the city anymore. I'm trying to keep track of all of the questions here.
Yeah, this is Nicole again. I think the next question is, we have teachers in Oakland who are afraid to visit / meet with families in the communities and their homes. How have you addressed this relational change issue in Seattle?
Yeah, I think this delves into the idea of mental modes and the power dynamics at play. I think we launched this effort a couple years ago to increase home visiting practices, but also recognize that home is not always the safest place that families want their school staff to step into. And so Seattle Housing Authority has used their community rooms as places for teachers and principals to meet with families. And so we had a 3-hour block period in Rainier Vista and New Holly, and teachers and staff from Mercer Middle School. Mercer Middle School came and set up 15, 20-minute appointments with families. And then they had a safer place to meet and come. And then also, we definitely did not feel comfortable launching home visits without shifting those mental modes first, the kind of widely held practices and beliefs and the implicit bias that people carry when they step into home visits. So we launched home visiting training with our participating schools to think about how do we have an asset-based lens of our families rather than a deficit-based. Why are we visiting? Are we visiting to to just share information? Are we visiting to make the family feel like we're blaming them for not doing something right? And so in these trainings, we dived into the idea of visiting families to create positive relationships. You cannot have difficult conversations with someone without having trust. So these home visits were explicitly about building trust and no other agenda. And we made sure that that mental mode or mental shift was made before we launched these home visiting practices. I see one more.
I would also just like to add that we have at Seattle Housing Authority a education team who works directly with youth and families, and also a host of partner organizations doing work in the community. And one of the roles that they play oftentimes is to support communication that happens from the school and from the school district to youth and families. But then we also are able to hear the questions, concerns, frustrations from families and students, and be able to share that with school staff so that they have a better picture of what students and families are experiencing, And then in addition to that, there are a host of events that happen during the summer and also during the school year in our communities that are not related to school. And so, as Kathleen mentioned, in an effort to build those positive relationships when school staff and school principals are able to come and attend those events and get to know the students and their families without an agenda from the school, as Kathleen mentioned, it certainly goes a long way for relationships building. And then finally, many of the schools that we partner with do have parent leader positions that help support and implement these events that we mentioned that happen in our community rooms. And so that is also another bridge and another way that power dynamics are shifted by having the people from the community be a part of this effort and help us to build those relationships and connections.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would, thank you, Marcus. I would add that it's a very gradual process and it's a multi-pronged approach. Other things that we did is look at what are the events that Seattle Housing Authority is already holding in the community, and how do we have principals and school staff start knowing about them and inviting them to them. So a summer festival that Seattle Housing Authority is often hosted alongside several partners. We got several schools in the area to host informational tables or host children's activities. And so creating lots of different connection points for teachers and families and principals to build that relationship. It takes time, but with our partnership, we create those opportunities to build that relationship. I'm looking at Angela's question or comment. The biggest challenge, and Angela, if you feel comfortable, would you like to say more about your question? And if not, it's totally okay. So I'll just read that. The biggest challenge when utilizing a systems change approach is to really dig deep and try to shift your mindset in order to make sure you're focusing on every detail and level, to make sure the work is holistic and intentional. Can you talk about the mindset shift and the processing that went into this effort?
I did.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Just unmute herself, and she, I think, was maybe not fast enough. So I just want to give her one more opportunity if she would like to join us. Yeah.
Yeah, would you like to say more about your question, Angela?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I think it takes a lot of people when you're trying to do systems change to all, start processing and thinking in this way together and really dig deep to make sure that the things you're doing are being processed at each level. And so I was just wondering if you could talk about the collaboration with the different partnerships and the effort that went into it, and maybe some tips on how other housing authorities or other programs can work to start building an effort like this.
Sure. I skipped over this slide. We think shifting mindsets is also about the different relationships and connections that people have with one another. And this also takes trust building. And so we have an executive steering committee that meets regularly, and that's the superintendent of our school district, Andrew Lofton, the executive director of the Housing Authority, and our shared cabinet members on both sides. So they hear updates on the partnership. We get to share, the different directors get to share the different initiatives that we're part of to try to listen for where connections can be made. And so at all levels of the organization, we're trying to make sure that there are relationships, regular check-in points, so we can stay connected. And then these are times where we also reinforce the values. What is our partnership striving for? How do we create healthier communities together? How do we be more supportive to our students and families? And then simultaneously, our staff from both of our agencies that are that are working most closely with students and families. We've also convened them, our family support workers, community builders on SHA's side, and tried to do some root cause analysis of here's the data that we're seeing around attendance, for example. What is the story behind these numbers? What are you hearing from students and families? Where can we go to be to hear directly from students and families without burdening them and making it easy for them to participate, so that we can do that root cause analysis. I also think it takes intentional professional development, as I mentioned earlier, for the home visiting practices, or what Marcus had mentioned around the trauma-informed practice. So see who is already providing professional development for either of your organizations, and start inviting them and seeing if it makes connections. So Seattle Housing Authority committed to 5 sessions with David Lewis, who is our trauma-informed care specialist, and about 50 to 100 staff attended each of those 5 consecutive trainings. So I think that's also a start. I often find in this work that people are hungry for information and wanting to better serve our students and families. And so I think these kind of shared trainings or shared spaces, and coming to a place where we admitting that we don't know all the answers, and that's why we're coming together to try to figure it out. Marcus, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's great, and I'll just add that the work within our partnership focused on education certainly has been supported by the focus of the school district and also Seattle Housing Authority on racial equity. And so there was already an effort and training going on in both agencies that I think did prepare the ground for this education partnership. I'll also mention that internally at Seattle Housing Authority, being relatively new to the agency, it's been clear to me that there is a strong value on education, how it potentially can benefit youth and families, and then just the value of education-related partnerships. And so an example of this commitment is our executive director, Andrew Lofton, has included education metrics in his annual evaluation. And so that's just another way of putting focus and intention within our agency to devise strategies in partnership with the school district and others to address chronic absenteeism in particular, and also other educational outcomes as well. And then finally, I'll say that as a partner with the school district, one thing that I've noticed that has been very beneficial is the relationship that the superintendent and our executive director have. They check in pretty frequently, a few times a year, to talk about how we can support one another's efforts. And through the relationship that our agencies have together, our staff has been invited to participate in several work groups and subcommittees where the district is trying to solve specific issues focused on students furthest from educational justice. Then I'll just finally state that the very students that the school district is focused on impacting in their strategic plan, many of them are our residents. And I think just the recognition of their focus area being kind of the heart of who we serve places a big sense of urgency on identifying ways that we can partner, and then also recognizing there are times that schools have trouble getting in contact with families or may not have the relationship necessary to move the work forward. And that's where the Seattle Housing Authority and other community partner agencies are able to really support those efforts. So that the clarity in mission and the clarity of focus area is certainly something that helps. I said that was the last thing. I'll mention one more quick thing. Having a position focused on housing partners in the school district has been extremely helpful, as is having a position similarly focused within the Housing Authority. So it's through those two positions that really the partnership has spread. And so when our partnership first started, there were a handful of people from both sides involved in these conversations. And now there are several people and departments all over both of our agencies who have the green light and readily reach out to one another for support on projects. And so we can definitely tell growth in our partnership through the number of connections and the number of people from both of our agencies who are actively involved in conversations together.
Thank you, Marcus. I know that we're almost out of time. 11:45, I believe, is our endpoint. And so I'm sorry that we didn't get to all the questions in the chat, but here is our contact information on this slide and our different web pages that talk about our partnership. I would love to chat with you. I would love to also connect on the different ways you're challenging the systems that you're in and get ideas from you as well. So please do continue to stay connected with us. And thank you all so much for being with us today and for the important work that you do.
Thank you so much, Marcus and Kathleen. This was a really great presentation. So as you can see, Nicole just dropped in the chat section. If you have our app, please make sure to remember to rate and review this session. That's super helpful for us for planning for next year and for giving feedback to our speakers. We are hoping everyone will take a quick 15-minute break, get some fresh air if you're able to, open your door, open your window, grab a snack. We'll be having our next set of breakout sessions. So what will happen is we will be actually closing this room. And if you want to come to the next education breakout session, which is case study presentations on Norfolk and Asheville, as well as a national partner with Urban Strategies, you would just re-enter this room. So you come back into the waiting room and we'll let you in at 3 o'clock when that session begins. If you want to go to a different breakout session, that's great. If you go back to CLPHA, that's CLPHA.zoom.us, then you can choose whichever session you'd like. And that address is there in the chat box for you. So thank you again to our speakers. This was really wonderful, and we will see everyone at 3 o'clock.